to give us a sense of the conversation and the meetings that happened.
Does anybody have a copy of the ministerial document?
Yeah, I think we.
One of you give it to me. My copy is left down.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Yeah, and we have the privilege of having with us right now EAM Dr. S. Jaishankar, as well as Foreign Secretary Shivinay Quatra. So I know time is running behind us, and we would give the.
Does anybody have a copy of the ministerial level?
Sir,
this will certainly work.
If I can get a text, it would be
yeah.
helpful.
May I request my team just to give a copy, a printout of the DMM final outcome document, which has just been adopted by the meeting. That will be here with us in a minute. Quickly, if you could. So, may I hand over the floor to you?
First of all, I seek your indulgence. थोड़ी सी देर हो गई, मैं क्षमा चाहता हूँ. The meeting went on for a little bit longer than we thought. So thank you for bearing with us. So this development ministers meeting of the G20 has just concluded. So I want to first of all share with you that we have approved unanimously 2 outcomes. One is a G20 action plan on accelerating progress in the Sustainable Development Goals. The second is a G20 high-level principles on lifestyle for sustainable development. So I think many of you आप लोग परिचित होंगे. Prime Minister had proposed how we should change our lifestyle. It was part of an initiative that we call LIFE. So these 2 outcomes were agreed to by everybody, and that was the main result of the morning session. We had further discussion on these subjects in the afternoon. Much of the morning was spent on sustainable development goals. Much of the afternoon was spent on climate change and the relationship between climate change and sustainable development goals. Then at the end of the meeting, we had outcome of the ministerial, of the development ministerial, which was an outcome document and a chair summary, because some countries had reservations on some parts of it. So these were the 3 documents which were done. In terms of the action plan, I want to share with you that the action plan put a very sharp focus on women-led development for achieving SDG goals. There was a commitment, how do we leverage data for development, because this is a digital era and there are many digital tools which can be used to advance development. Many of you are familiar. In India, in the last few years, we have shown how much of a difference digital apps and digitally driven programs can make in terms of public delivery of programs and goods. It also focused on human-centric economic growth and the sustainable finance for development, including through the reform of international financial institutions. So these were the main aspects of the action plan. And the action plan is very important because I think most of you would know that in the last few years, many of the sustainable development goals of countries have fallen behind because they are under financial stress. There is a debt pressure on them. They are finding food and energy and fertilizers more expensive. So the G20 basically understood today, recognized today that the global south is having great problems, that somewhere we have to have to respond to it through an action plan. So this action plan was proposed by India, and I'm very happy to say on this matter there was no politics. Everybody understood the importance of it. Everybody rose to that occasion. So there was a desire to be completely helpful on everybody's part. The second outcome was on lifestyle for sustainable development, and basically the thinking behind this, because some of you would be familiar, some of you may not be so familiar what is this initiative about. Basically what has happened for many years, when we think of growth, we think that growth means there should be more consumption in every country, in every society. So our thinking of growth is there should be higher consumption, and that will drive growth. What it has happened is that this has damaged nature, this has created problems for the planet. So Prime Minister has been proposing for some time that instead of looking at the supply side, we should actually look at the demand. And if every individual, because when we again think of saving the planet, we think, okay, this is the job of a government, it is the job of UN, it is the job of an organization. We don't fully recognize it is a job, it is a responsibility for every one of us. That there is an individual, that is every one of us as an individual can contribute to a better planet, to protecting really the environment and nurturing it. And this is something which has taken the form of, as I said, this set of initiatives, and they focus on economic and social improvement through lifestyles for environment. They give priority to basic needs, because again, many countries, and again, I point even to India, that the basic needs of vulnerable sections of society have to be met if we are to talk seriously about sustainability. That sustainability, we cannot say there is a sustainable planet and you have a very rich segment of that planet, you have a very vulnerable segment of the planet, and one is not connected to the other. The third part of it is really the outlook of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is really the world is a family, and in the case of India, you know, the G20 motto itself is of one earth and of one family and of one future. And the core principle, what I think today the G20 agreed is, individuals, apart from governments and organizations, individuals and communities must contribute to environmental and sustainability issues, and that this needs to be done at a grassroots level. We also had a discussion about how, you know, the local communities should connect with global policy making. How do we link that? How do we get benefits of that? And that, again, there was a very important acceptance that when we talk today about progress in the world, it is not just about economic progress, though economic progress is very important. Economic progress must always have sustainability as a component. There must also be a sharing of cultures, and that is again something that was widely recognized. So this is broadly the sense of what we discussed today in terms of the documents. I just want to add something else, because during the course of discussions, I think many delegations made some very interesting points. A lot of them were very appreciative of the Voice of Global South summit process which India had convened. In fact, the delegates, especially from the Global South, but I would say even from you know, the developed countries, many of them said that they recognized that instead of, I think this was particularly the view which AU expressed, that instead of actually telling countries of the South what G20 has done for the first time a G20 president was asking countries of the global south, what do you want put before the G20? So this was a very strong point which was made. The second point I want to bring to your attention is, you all know in the morning our session began with Prime Minister's address. That address is public, you know, it was an open session, and it was very, very widely welcomed. I think many heads of delegations in their remarks actually specifically said that they saw a Prime Minister who was personally invested in development, in sustainability, in poverty alleviation, in inclusiveness. And his address, I must tell you, really set the tone today for our discussions. I want to add a small personal touch here as well. After Prime Minister's address, we showed a brief snapshot of the progress in Narmada district in Gujarat. And the reason is that it's an aspirational district. It is also a district where I happen to focus on in terms of development work. And I was actually able, because yesterday a lot of ministers asked me, saying, you know, we read about development in India. You know, we hear what does digital do, you know, that's advancement in terms of women's issues. We are seeing education progress. So they were very curious that, you know, we read about it, but, you know, how does it happen on the ground? So this snapshot that we did, and after showing it, in fact, I put it out on Twitter, so those of you who are curious may want to see it. It actually showed them on the ground what happens, that to the last mile, how is delivery done. The other point which I wanted to mention is that many delegations expressed very deep solidarity and sympathy on the Orissa rail accident. I also acknowledged the fact that they did that. So again, I make the point that at moments of misfortune or tragedy, today the whole world really stands as one. And the concluding, I would say, concluding note before we actually came to the last session was that the Indian presidency, again for many delegations, was a cause of optimism. That they felt that the Indian presidency actually brought development back into the center of G20 discussions. And that this was somewhere in between, focus was a little bit lost, I would say, or less. And they were very, very appreciative of this. So this was really the thrust of the meeting developments. But I think my coming here and speaking to you, I should, of course, fully recognize the enormous support that we have got to hold this meeting in Varanasi. We had yesterday, most of us went for the Ganga Aarti. And almost everybody told me today morning in the meeting, before we went into the meeting, for them it was a unique experience. That if you know, other than the outcomes we got, everybody said when we go back, we will carry that picture of Ganga Aarti in our minds. So for them, actually Kashi, Varanasi, made a very deep impression, the idea, and in fact it highlighted this importance of understanding and appreciating other cultures. That today for a lot of countries to see this thousands of years city, you know, with the layers of history which is so visibly expressed, I think that was a very moving experience. Even here, I would say that the handicrafts they saw, the folk dances they saw, the handlooms, this too was important. And yesterday evening, Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath ji was very gracious enough to come down to Varanasi to meet all of them, to interact with many delegation leaders. They appreciated it. I mean, I appreciated it again because I know the great effort which has gone into making this a successful meeting. And the sense of pride today that Uttar Pradesh as a state and Varanasi as a city has in hosting this meeting. And this state has been a fantastic partner in terms of our G20 efforts, and I really want to use this to underline my appreciation for what the Chief Minister and his team has done. So I think that would be a fair account of the meetings today. So if you have any questions, I would be very happy to answer that.
Thank you. We will now open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent, and please limit yourself to one question if possible. We are running behind time. Yes, sir. You there. Microphone will come to you. Please hold. Please sit.
Good evening, sir. Dhairya Maheshwari from Sputnik International. My question is about the gaps in the SDG financing, which has been soaring since the pandemic. So have there been any concrete commitments particularly from the rich nations? And another related question to SDGs is the politicization of supply chains. It has been making an impact in Indian communities as well, particularly in the diamond industry in Gujarat. So what sort of discussion
What kind of question? Sorry, what
politicization of supply chains, which has been affecting the economic, well-being of communities?
The answer to your point is, yes, SDG financing gap was discussed. Yes, it was recognized as a very, very important issue. And there was a discussion about the UN Secretary General's proposal for a SDG stimulus at the UN. There's also, by the way, a Paris summit on a new global financing pact in which France and India are among the leading countries who are working on that. So this was very much a concern, because at the end of the day, the feeling was without more resources. Before SDG was slowing down, actually in the last few years, many of the goals have regressed. So the feeling is we have to do something very different, very special, and resourcing was one of the issues. Your second question about the diamond industry. This is not a G20 issue. The diamond industry concern is essentially coming out of the G7. So when Prime Minister went to Hiroshima and we met with G7 leaders, it was something that we discussed with them. I was myself in Brussels. I met both the Prime Minister of Belgium and with the commissioners in the European Union. And on Prime Minister's instructions, I raised this issue with both of them, that this is a matter of livelihood for many people, that it is not an issue where, which should be taken in a not fully considered way. And we really do believe that, the totality of the global economy should always be considered when important decisions are made.
Yes, please. Microphone next to you.
गुड इवनिंग सर, मैं गिरीश दुबे ANI से वाराणसी से। सर, प्रधानमंत्री जी ने भी ग्लोबल साउथ की बात की थी सवेरे, आप भी ग्लोबल साउथ की बात करें। जो आज की दिन भर की जो मीटिंग हुई, G20 के जो डेवलपमेंट मिनिस्टर आए थे, उसमें किस तरह के कंसेंट मिला उनसे और क्या बात हुई उसमें
ग्लोबल साउथ के विषय पर?
देखिए, जो आप जो कह रहे हैं बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं कि आज सुबह भी प्रधानमंत्री ने ग्लोबल साउथ पे काफ़ी बल दिया, और जो हम कहते हैं वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ, हमारी कोशिश थी साल के शुरुआत में कि ग्लोबल साउथ की जो चिंताएं जो हैं, उनके मुद्दे जो हैं, उनको एक बार जब तक हम उनसे बात नहीं करेंगे और उनकी चिंता नहीं समझ पाएंगे, तो G20 जो है वो अपने रास्ते में जा रहा है और ग्लोबल साउथ जो है वो पीछे रह जाता है, उनकी कोई सुनता भी नहीं। तो हमारी कोशिश थी कि वो 125 देश जो थे, 125 देश जो थे, उनसे एक बार अगर संपर्क संवाद हो जाए, उनसे बात करें, उनकी बात सुने, उसका निचोड़ निकालें और उसको G20 के सामने रखें। और G20 में भी अगर एक ऐसा माने, क्योंकि आप जानते हैं कि इसके अलग अलग ट्रैक्स होते हैं, उसमें से सबसे जो स्वाभाविक था कि हम इस मुद्दे को उठाएं, ये वो इस ट्रैक में था। तो हमने बिल्कुल ये बात उठाई कि G20 की ये ये चिंताएं हैं, और ख़ासकर जो एनर्जी, जो मैं कहता हूँ एनर्जी, फूड, फर्टिलाइज़र की हैं, डेट की, कि बहुत सारे ऐसे देश हैं उनका ऋण, उनका डेट, उनका कर्जा इतना ज़्यादा है कि वो उसको वापस दे नहीं पाएंगे। और आजकल जो डेट रिलीफ जो मिलता है वो खाली कुछ देशों को मिलता है, क्योंकि ये एक पुराना फार्मूला था जब दुनिया की इकोनॉमी कुछ और थी। तो उसके बाद कुछ और देश आए हैं और उनको आजकल कहलाया जाता है कि भाई आप तो एलिजिबल ही नहीं हो। अब अगर वो इस माने कठिन समस्या में है और आप उनको कहते हैं कि रूल जो है कुछ अलग है, ये तो नहीं चलेगा। तो हमने जो है ये 125 देश की ओर से उनके मुद्दे जो हैं हमने सामने रखा, और मुझे लगा कि आज जो है G20 के देश सुनने के लिए तैयार हैं। उनको भी ये नहीं है कि ये ना समझते हैं या ना समझना चाहते हैं, उनको भी लगता है कि भाई हाँ कुछ है इस बात पे। और अगर भारत जैसा देश और नरेंद्र मोदी जैसे प्रधानमंत्री अगर वो अपनी आवाज़ उठाएं, अब अगर वो खुद माने पर्सनली इस बात को सामने रखें, मुझे लगता है कि दुनिया पे ज़रूर असर होगा। और मुझे आज इसका असर जो है इस पे दिखाई देता है, पर इसको हमें अब ज़मीन में उतारना है। इसमें कुछ और भी ट्रैक्स हैं, जो फाइनेंस ट्रैक जो है उससे भी कुछ निकलेगा, कुछ और भी हैं। और जो बड़ी मीटिंग जो सितंबर में होगी उसमें देखना होगा कि उसमें उस मीटिंग के दौरान क्या निकलता है।
Anyone else? Okay. Eliana?
Good afternoon, Eliana, TASS News Agency. Am I right to understand that the outcomes of today's meeting will be the part of the declaration for the summit in September? And
sorry. Yeah.
yes, and I also have another question. I heard on the sidelines of the meeting that during the first part of the discussions, the countries supported the statement or the proposals, or what is it, the speech of the delegate from Russia, which was on food security. So is it like this, if it is so, what were these proposals, and do they reflect the needs of global South countries?
Questions are there?
Yeah,
because we're running a little bit out of time.
Please go ahead.
So this is Amrit Pal
I'll
Singh
take
from
two and then.
DD News. Sir, I wanted to know about what transpired at the bilateral meetings that you held with the representatives from the ones you met, especially the Singaporeans.
Singapore. Yaki, microphone here, please.
Thanks. Hi, Jackie Marsons, BBC. Just a question. At the beginning of the whole G20 process, there was concern that Ukraine was going to slightly derail the talks. Do you feel that this meeting has put the focus squarely back on development, which is what India was interested in, where the meeting should go?
Last question, you please.
Hi, I am Saurabh Agrawal from Bharat Express. My question is कि आपने बताया कि सेकंड सेशन में लाइफस्टाइल पे भी चर्चा हुई, तो ये G20 के जो कंट्रीज थे, कोई एक कम्प्रिहेंसिव प्लान बनाया जो ये लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस पे लेकर कुछ आउटकम आए इस पे?
Okay. Your first question about the summit. You know, what typically happens in a G20 presidency is there are many tracks. There are about, I think, 14 or 15 tracks. And these 15 tracks, like say there's an environment track, there's an education track, there's a finance track, there's a development track, there's a foreign minister's track. So there are multiple tracks. So these tracks produce different outcomes, and finally when we reach the summit level, we have to find ways of how to integrate this and give each of the outcomes what we feel is the right priority at that point of time. So it is not that anything we have agreed to here. For example, we had these two very important outcomes, the high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development and the action plan on accelerating progress in SDGs. Yes, absolutely, because this is unanimous. This is central to world development. It's frankly, to date, it is so far the biggest achievement of our presidency. This is the biggest achievement of our presidency, and it is for the South. You know, today when countries of the South, global South, read this document, they will actually say, yes, India heard us, India stood up, India put our issues forward before G20, and G20 has accepted many of those and now is going on a certain path which kind of answers your question. So I think, yes, much of what we have done will be reflected in the summit, but there will be other ministerials also which will contribute to what is happening in the summit. You asked me about the Russian head of delegation's remarks. Look, you know, first of all, I think what happened inside the room, unless it is very complimentary and polite, we normally don't, you know, say this delegation said this and that delegation said this. I would say the fairest thing would be every delegation spoke for its interest and for its I would say, outlook. Now, different countries, you know, some countries may be a little closer to others, but I would not get into this, you know, who supported whom and who did not support whom. I don't think that is helpful. I think the fairest description is everybody spoke for themselves. And my job as chair was to find the common elements and put it together, and that is the document that is there before you. The question about Singapore, you know, we had a discussion on a set of issues because we have a continuous conversation with Singapore. So, you know, some of it was bilateral because we have a high-level ministerial visit. But the most important thing today with Singapore was that Singapore ratified the International Solar Alliance. So they gave me the ratification document. So that is a big step, because when a country like Singapore, which is so active, energetic, which is so motivational for many other countries, joins the ISA fully, this is something which is very important. Your question about, you know, is the focus back on development? I think yes. Look, in a way, it was understandable last year that the focus was on the more immediate issues pertaining to the conflict. But what happened was, over a period of time, the narrative began to take root that the conflict and you know, its repercussions should not obfuscate, should not completely, you know, sideline what are real concerns, you know, pain points of the global South. That, you know, there are countries today where they cannot afford food, they are running short of fuel, and a lot of it, I must tell you, is in this region. You know, you look at our neighbors. You know, our neighbors are among those who have suffered a lot in the last year. I've made a few trips to Africa, and you can see the impact of that. So, you know, we are in no way diminishing the seriousness of the conflict and its consequences. But the conflict was dealt with through an agreed understanding at Bali. Okay. So, and that was an understanding of the leaders. So, right now, our focus is really how do you today address this very pressing needs of developing countries, the small island developing states, the least developed countries, those who are really teetering on the edge of an abyss. And that, I would say, with some pride and some, you know, really a sense of achievement. I think today, if you ask me what did you get done today, I think we really got the G20 to look at sustainable development growth, look at what is happening with Global South, think about financing for them, look at climate, think about climate financing, look at the link between development and financing, look at women's issues, at education, you know, at digital. These are the real issues of the world. And I think in that sense, yes, I think got the spotlight, the focus on those issues. And finally, आपका जो सवाल जो था कि लाइफस्टाइल पे क्या चर्चा हुई, देखिए जो आज जो सहमति जो बनी थी, ये लाइफस्टाइल पे 9 सिद्धांत हैं जो हम अंग्रेज़ी में कहते हैं कि हाई लेवल प्रिंसिपल्स। ये अगर आप ये डॉक्यूमेंट इसको हम लोगों ने अपलोड किया है, ये अगर आप देख लें कि जो सिद्धांत जो हैं, ये है कि माने हर व्यक्ति की जिम्मेदारी होती है, अगर हम अपने रोज़ के जीवन में कुछ परिवर्तन लाएं, आप थोड़ा एनवायरनमेंट के बारे में कुछ सोचें, हम अपने कंजम्पशन पैटर्न्स को थोड़ा बदलें, तो इसमें पूरा एनवायरनमेंट, हमें ये नहीं सोचना चाहिए कि एनवायरनमेंट बचाना किसी और का काम है, ये हम सबका दायित्व है। तो ये 9 प्रिंसिपल्स जो हैं, ये पूरे दुनिया को क्योंकि ये G20 जो है अलग अलग, आप जानते हैं कि कुछ विकसित देश हैं, कुछ विकासशील देश हैं, कुछ अमेरिका से हैं, कुछ यूरोप से हैं, अफ्रीका से हैं, तो हम सब मिलके हमारा जो है सहमति जो बना इन 9 सिद्धांतों पे, ये छोटी बात नहीं। और ये सहमति जो है ये ग्लोबल साउथ के बहुत काम आएगा, क्योंकि एक बार अगर आप मान लें कि हमें कंजम्पशन पे कुछ सीमा रखनी चाहिए, कुछ अनुशासन दिखाना चाहिए, तो ये दुनिया में एक किस्म से फोर्स ऑफ चेंज बन जाता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि आज जो है दुनिया में बहुत ऐसे देश होंगे जिनको लगेगा कि आज सचमुच भारत के नेतृत्व में उनके हित जो हैं आगे बढ़े हैं, कि उनकी मांगे जो हैं उसको कहीं दुनिया ने माना है, और कम से कम उसको कैसे आगे बढ़ाएं, वो प्रोसेस जो है वो जारी होगी।
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for a comprehensive briefing. Thank you also to Foreign Secretary, sir, and to S. Jaishankar.